Welcome to today's Read Aloud. We have Dr. Sharon Davies from the College of Law, Moritz College of Law. She is the John C. Elam Vorys Sater's designated professor of law, which I can almost say, which is quite a distinguished honor. She graduated from Columbia University and worked as an associate attorney for Steptoe and Johnson in Washington, D.C., and then for Lord Day and Lord Barrett Smith in New York City. After that, she served for 5 years as an assistant United States attorney in the Criminal Division of the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, which is widely thought to be the premier U.S. Attorney's Office in the country. She joined us here at OSU in 1995. She's a full professor, and her research focus has been in the area of criminal law and procedure. And this particular book that she's going to read from, is related to that. And I'll let her take over and tell you all about it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to everybody for coming out on a cold winter day like today. But what better than to sit by a fire and talk about your own work? This is a real privilege for me. So I invite everybody who's sitting towards the back to come on up closer to the fire and be comfortable if you like, because there are extra seats up here. Let me give you a little bit of background about this story before I read to you from the book. As Ruth said, I am a law professor, and this kind of writing is actually very unusual for a law professor. Law professors, you may know, tend to publish primarily in law journals, relatively short articles on discrete issues of law that interest us. Generally, we speak to other law professors, some lawyers, judges, but usually that narrow of an audience, a group of legal thinkers primarily. But when I discovered the story that this book recounts, I decided to do something that was very different for a law professor, and that was to write this book in the narrative, almost in the way that a novel would read, although I assure you that it is nonfiction. Every word of it is true, and that is actually kind of amazing, given what this story is about. Turns out, I learned from this story that truth sometimes is stranger than fiction, and there were points when I was learning about the story and then writing about this story where I would just be shaking my head in disbelief, because it seemed like it had to be made up. So many things in it were really truly amazing, but also reflective of who we were as a nation when this story occurred back in Birmingham, Alabama in 1921. So let me give you a little bit of a background about the story itself, so that the passages that I read to you will make a little bit of sense. The book itself opens on August 11th, 1921, hot summer day, when two people decided to get married. The couple were Ruth Stevenson, who was an 18-year-old girl, and her fiancé, Pedro Guzman, who was a wallpaper hanger. He hung wallpaper for a living in Birmingham, Alabama. He was older than Ruth by, about 15 years or so. And he had a reputation for being a very hard worker. He was well liked in Birmingham, but he was also Catholic, and he was Puerto Rican. He had been in Birmingham, Alabama for about 13 years by this point, and so this was his home. But he was a native of Puerto Rico. He came to the United States when he was about 18 years old. So these two decided to get married in August of 1921, and they married in stealth. They slipped away from their jobs in the middle of this day, and they left Birmingham and went to a nearby town called Bessemer, Alabama. They did that because they didn't want to run into anyone who knew Ruth, who might ask some questions about what they were doing together, particularly Ruth's father, who was a Methodist minister named Reverend Edwin Stevenson. The reason why they particularly wanted to avoid Ruth's father, and her mother for that matter, was because the two of them knew that her parents would not approve of them getting married. So they slipped away in the middle of this day. Now, a little bit of background about the resistance that the Stevensons, Ruth's parents, would have had to their marriage. You might think, as I thought originally when I first heard about this story, that it centered around Pedro's race or ethnicity, the fact that he was Puerto Rican and she was not. But it turns out that the resistance that Reverend Edwin Stevenson and his wife Mary had to their marriage had more to do with Pedro's religion, Catholicism, than anything else. Reverend Edwin Stevenson and his wife were rabidly anti-Catholic. I think it is fair to say that. And they weren't alone. They had lots of company. At that time, there was a very powerful wave of anti-Catholicism that gripped many in the United States. And that anti-Catholicism was reflected not just in the events of this day, but in many things that preceded it, including the fact that during this period of time, enormously popular newsletters, anti-Catholic newsletters, could be bought at any newsstand, right along with all the newspapers of the day, the most popular newspapers of the day. And including the fact that this was a period of time when the Ku Klux Klan had, the second Klan now, not the Klan of Reconstruction days, but the second Ku Klux Klan had expanded its targets to include Catholics, Jews, immigrants generally, along with blacks. And so this was a time when fraternal organizations, secret fraternal organizations like the Klan and many others, had a very powerful anti-Catholic bent to them. That was true on the day that these two decided to get married, and it figured significantly into this story because, as it turned out, Reverend Edwin Stevenson, Ruth's father, was a Klansman. That was not particularly unusual for men in his community at this time. This was not like the first Klan of Reconstruction days. This was the second Klan that was easily the most popular Klan in American history. The reason why it was so popular and was able to attract men like Reverend Edwin Stevenson into its ranks was because it had expanded its targets and it had rebranded itself as a patriotic fraternal organization, an organization of patriots. And by doing that, it was able to attract what Klan scholars tell us were the best men in town. And what that meant was doctors, lawyers, judges, law enforcement officers in great numbers, and men of the clergy, the Protestant clergy, like Reverend Edwin Stevenson. So it turns out that Edwin Stevenson's membership in the Ku Klux Klan was not aberrational. It was typical. of this time, and that would play a role in the events of this story. So let me read you a passage from this. It talks a little bit about what happened on that day when Ruth and Pedro decided to run off from their jobs and get married. Ruth and Pedro had agreed to make August 11th, 1921 look like a normal workday. They had agreed to meet at noon with a plan to take the streetcar to Bessemer, where they would apply for their license to avoid running into Ruth's father at the courthouse in Birmingham. But when the time came for Ruth to meet Pedro that day, and she moved toward the front door of the store where she worked, one of her uncles was just walking in. She was sure she would be caught, she said later, but by some act of heaven the man failed to see her, and Ruth willed her feet to keep moving until she reached the spot outside where Pedro was waiting. In Bessemer, they were nearly foiled again. After they had obtained their license from the probate judge, they walked the few blocks to the local Catholic church, St. Aloysius, and asked to speak with Father Callahan, its presiding priest. But the priest was out. He would not be back in time to perform their rites, they were told. How strange the things that can unravel a plan. The possibility that Father Callahan might be away had obviously not occurred to them. After formulating a secret meeting place, dodging Ruth's relative, sidestepping the place her father was most likely to be, and obtaining the state's official permission to wed, the last critical ingredient needed to accomplish their plan, a priest, was missing. It could not have been easy for the couple to decide to return to Birmingham. The Bessemer marriage license authorized any official pastor in the state to marry them, so if they could make it to St. Paul's unseen, they could ask Father Coyle for his help. But the rectory of St. Paul's was terrifyingly close to the courthouse, where Ruth's father conducted marriages in the hallways. If Stevenson happened to step outside as they were approaching the rectory, all would be lost. Worse, had Ruth and Pedro known the full truth, that Edwin Stevenson was already on the lookout for his daughter, that he had been canvassing the streets all afternoon, that he and Mary Stevenson had alerted the police there and a private detective as well, all of whom were making efforts to find the girl, the prospect of returning to the city would likely have been unthinkable. But the couple labored under that great advantage of ignorance, and being unaware of the determined multiplicity of efforts already underway in the city to discover her, Ruth and Pedro resolved to double back to Birmingham to be married at St. Paul's. And somehow they managed it. When the streetcar arrived back in the city, Pedro and Ruth stepped off it and moved toward the towering twin steeples that guarded the entrance of St. Paul's. The bustle of the downtown streets must have conferred some soothing, frenetic cover, helping them pass undetected, even across 3rd Avenue and straight up the walkway to the rectory door. But there, luck failed them again. Father Coyle was out, Father Brady told them. He was visiting with Father Malone at the rebuilt St. Catherine's Church in nearby Pratt City, and Ruth and Pedro had posted no bands at St. Paul's announcing their plans to marry in advance, so by church rule, only its presiding priest, Father Coyle, possessed the authority to take their vows. It might have seemed that heaven itself was testing their firmness. Later, no doubt, with the maddening benefit of hindsight, Father Brady must have wished that he had just sent the twosome away. But at that moment, as he looked at the couple standing on the threshold of the rectory, no doubt he read the desperation on their faces. The urge to assist them must have been strong. He could call St. Catherine's to see if Father Coyle could be reached, Father Brady offered. Ruth and Pedro said they would wait.